Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Liberation of the city of Kherson.
Okay, all right, guys. Next episode, I'd recommend watching the previous ones, but that's up to you. We're on episode 12 now. Last one was the grain deal episode. Original link, always where it is. Top description, Discord link. Would love to have you. Click on it. Send it right over there. Let's go. Okay.
The most important event on the battlefield in Ukraine in the first half of November was the liberation of the city of Kherson after 2.5 months of fighting since the start of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in late August. This remarkable victory of the Ukrainian army came after the annexation of Kherson Oblast by Putin and pledges from Russia never to leave this region. The Ukrainian command and HIMARS had a different idea, as Ukraine completed an important strategic and symbolic mission of liberating the sole regional center occupied by Russia since the start of the war in February 2022. Let's see how Kherson was liberated and what else happened in November's first half. Hey history fans, quick channel update. We like taking our time with our decisions and we want to create historical videos for you for decades to come. So
Guys, I just want to get my coffee downstairs, so I'll be right back.
some of our decisions happened slowly. Due to a request from our fans, we decided to cut ties with a certain sponsor. Unfortunately, this will impact our channel's finances negatively and will force us to release fewer videos in the upcoming months. On the one hand, it will happen because of the reduced funds available to be paid to our contributors, and on the other because of the current algorithm. As we've said previously, most of the money earned by this channel is being reinvested into more, better researched and better made videos, as well as our Wizards and Warriors and Cold War channels. Sponsorships and your continued support allow us to make up to 25 videos per month. Sponsorships allow us to cover our losses and release more videos, but cutting ties and losing those funds will make creating and releasing them unfeasible. We've got a great team and we want to be able to continue paying them living or competitive wages and not cut back on production. So please consider supporting our channel via Patreon. The link is in the description, and YouTube membership, the button under the video. For just $5 you can support our work, watch exclusive videos, there are 6 or 7 now and more are added every week, get early access to free videos, learn our schedule, get access to our private Discord, watch our behind the scenes videos, and much more. Thank you for watching and for your kind support.
I'm really behind on this stuff, guys, so bear with me.
Speculations related to the Russian army's intentions continued in early November. Some of the elite forces of the Russian army, such as the 7th Guards Mountain Air Assault Division, were still operating on the right bank of the Dnipro. Newly mobilized troops were sent there, while Kherson occupation officials like Kirill Stremisov continued making statements about how the Russian forces would likely have to leave an occupied portion of the right bank of the Dnipro. The reported construction of defensive fortifications in the vicinity of Kherson was also inconsistent with the announcements of withdrawal, as such fortifications usually indicate expected defensive battles. Reports of new trenches and bunkers followed this, and defensive positions were being built on the left bank of the Dnipro, even on the Black Sea coast. Bloggers informed us about 3 defensive lines beyond the Dnipro, which indicated preparation for a potential eventual Ukrainian attack in this area. On November 9th, the speculations were finally over. For 2 days, reports of heavy Ukrainian pressure on the critical and long-contested town of Snehirivka circled around, and the Russian units in the area finally had to withdraw before blowing a bridge in the area to delay the Ukrainian forward units. This was followed by information about the destruction of other bridges on the right bank of the Dnipro controlled by Russia, as the Russian army withdrew towards the Dnipro. This process culminated in the televised meeting of Surovikin and Shoigu, in which the new commander of the Russian army in Ukraine told the defense minister that the most logical option of organizing defense would be along the river Dnipro. Shoigu responded, "Start withdrawal of troops beyond the river Dnipro." The pro-Ukrainian segment of social media rejoiced, while the Ukrainian officials called for calm, as they indicated that the words of Russian officials should not be trusted. The sentiments of the pro-Russian segment were different. While a small group implies that this sentiments of the pro-Russian segment were different. while a small group implied that this was just a tactic to lure the Ukrainian troops towards the Dnipro, where they would be destroyed, the vast majority of Russian posts on social media expressed anger, particularly against Putin. The latter was careful to leave the unpopular decision to be announced by his military commanders, but this did not save him from being blamed for this failure. Concerns of the Ukrainian command would not come to fruition, as for 2 days, the Ukrainian unit...
Guys, so are these bloggers, Russian bloggers from outside of Russia? Because if they're inside of Russia, then wouldn't Russian authorities find them if they're like speaking bad about Putin or about the war effort? Wouldn't they find out who they are? So, and then arrest them or something? All right, guys, I had to cut a piece there anyways, but I want to pose a question kind of going into the video. I'm really curious. I was talking to someone about it yesterday who recommended the video, Melkor. What do you think is a winnable concept? I think I doubt Russia is going to get the entirety of Ukraine. I doubt that Ukraine will ever see Putin have any sort of justice. So it's going to be somewhere in between there. And I just wonder, do you think it's possible Ukraine gets everything back, including Crimea? Or do you think it's more likely that in the end, international support is going to wane when Russia starts giving like a, hey, I'll stop if we keep this area? Does that make sense? So I wonder if you think that concession is more likely and that, or full victory by Ukraine. I mean, I don't see any scenario where Putin faces any sort of justice at all. I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
By the Russian army were busy entering villages and towns abandoned by the Russian army. On November 11th, after more than 8 months of occupation, the only regional capital of Ukraine occupied by Russia, Kherson, was liberated. Ukraine liberated some 4,800 square kilometers of Mykolaiv and Kherson oblasts in 2 days. Of course, this overshadowed another story which took place on the announcement of the Russian withdrawal. On November 9th, the Russian-appointed official of the Kherson Oblast, Kirill Stremisov, died in a traffic accident in Henichesk. The timing of this accident is strange, as some Russian Telegram channel admins claimed that Stremisov was assassinated after being ruled redundant with the withdrawal from Kherson. On the 15th, photos showing his car ridden with bullets were released, making the accident less likely.
Okay.
Withdrawing Russian forces blew up.
I was going to say, it's not like you can't die in a car crash during a war, but
heavily damaged Antonivsky
bullet
Bridge.
holes.
Withdrawing Russian forces blew up the already heavily damaged Antonivsky Bridge on their way out. This withdrawal also reportedly forced the Russian command to relocate its bases, now in range of HIMARS, further away. For instance, it was claimed that the helicopter base in Chaplinka was relocated after the Russian withdrawal. On November 14th, Ukrainian President Zelensky visited Kherson and took part in the official ceremony dedicated to raising the Ukrainian flag in the city. The Battle of Kherson ended in yet another significant victory for the Ukrainian army. The counterattack...
If Ukraine wins this, that guy is going to be so famous.
Kherson and took part
Zelensky. I mean, he's already famous, but
in the official ceremony.
If Ukraine wins this war, he will go down as a extremely significant historical figure in the 21st century.
And took part in the official ceremony dedicated to raising the Ukrainian flag in the city. The Battle of Kherson ended in yet another significant victory for the Ukrainian army. The counterattack launched in this area in late August, after continuous HIMARS strikes on Russian supply lines on the right bank of the Dnipro and their military infrastructure in the area, resulted at first in territorial losses for the Russian army, and then in complete withdrawal from this area due to inability to adequately supply its troops. The Russian army had a dilemma of standing their ground and fighting while running low on supplies and risking losing a considerable force of at least 20,000 men, or saving this army and using the Dnipro as a natural barrier for their defense. Make no mistake, the Russian command chose the second option reluctantly, amidst intense pressure from the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian military forced Putin to choose the lesser of two evils in this situation, which did not save him from an angry reaction at home. While the situation in Kherson had been getting increasingly complicated for Russia for months, the annexation of Kherson Oblast and pledges that Russia would always remain in Kherson gave hope to ordinary Russian citizens supporting the war that Russia would at least fight in Kherson. After all, Russia kept some of its elite units in Kherson, and despite all the difficulties they experienced, the Russian contingent was still formidable and combat-ready. The withdrawal is arguably one of the heaviest blows on Putin's legitimacy and popularity in Russia since the start of his reign. In an unexpected turn of events, one of the chief ideologues of Russia, one of the authors of the Russian world idea, which promotes the political and cultural unification of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, Alexander Dugin, publicly criticized Putin. He wrote, "Kherson is given away. Authorities, they are responsible for this. What is the point of absolutist rule which we have then? We give the ruler absolute power, and he saves us all, the people, the state, and citizens in critical moments. It is unpleasant if he surrounds himself with incompetent ministers and spits on social justice, but it is fine if he manages to save us. What if he does not? The absolutist rule also has a reverse side. Absolute power in success, but also absolute responsibility for failure. Remember the Reign Kings." Reign King is a reference to James Fraser's Golden Bough, monarchs chosen for a time of prosperity and killed in case they failed to invoke rain. This is about as scathing an attack as Putin ever received, particularly from his allies, and shows fractures in the Russian elite. To conclude the description of the situation.
So, is he saying like that Putin should be killed in
on the Kherson front, we should describe another interesting claim circulated on social media on November 13th and 14th. It has been claimed that Ukrainian special forces landed on Kinburn Spit on November 12th. Some have further stated that the unit was from the Ukrainian 73rd Marine Special Operations Center. The group reportedly traveled to Kinburn Spit on motorboats at night before landing near Pokrovska on November 12th and advancing all the way to Heroiska. Several pro-Russian bloggers confirmed that Ukraine had indeed tried to conduct an operation in this area, but were defeated by the Russian units. On November 14th, footage of Ukrainian special forces on motorboats going somewhere at night was shared, but they did not specify the destination of these motorboats. Although we do not think that it actually happened, it is worth monitoring if Ukraine indeed tries to reach the left bank of the Dnipro from Kinburn Spit. It is advantageous regarding the lack of Russian defensive fortifications and personnel in the area, but disadvantageous because it may cause problems with the sustainability of supplies. Kinburn Spit has marshland terrain, which
and it feels like even if you get a good landing, then you can't exactly spread out and surround. There's only one way you can go, which is down the peninsula here.
Which is going to make forward movement difficult for either side. For the Russians to defeat the Ukrainian bridgehead if they have indeed established that, and for the Ukrainians to advance further. Furthermore, rumors about the Ukrainian advance on Oleshki and battles in Hola Pristan circulated on November 14th and 15th. On November 15th, the Ukrainian command confirmed artillery strikes on enemy positions in this area, but refuted any ground assault by the Ukrainian army. These artillery strikes may be a prelude for this ground assault, or could end up serving the purpose of fixing the Russian forces on the left bank of the Dnipro, which may prevent them from relocating elsewhere. Forcing the Dnipro and establishing a sustainable bridgehead on the left bank of the river will be difficult for the Ukrainian army. In any case, it does not look like the Ukrainian army intends to conduct an operational pause on this front, and is looking to develop its success. We can safely speculate that at this point, the Ukrainian command is already looking for potential spots to create a bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnipro, as protecting the front of more than 200 kilometers is not going to be easy for Russia. But there is also information that Ukraine is already relocating some of its units that took part in the Battle of Kherson to Zaporizhia and North Luhansk, which may indicate that the Ukrainian command may want to avoid a costly advance to the left bank of the Dnipro and focus on other axes of potential attack instead. So what happened on other fronts in this period? Heavy battles continued on the North Luhansk front, as the Ukrainian army attempted to take Svatova under control. They have been met with heavy resistance by the Russian army here. Russia has maintained the Troitska-Svatova-Kreminna line on this front without losing considerable ground, despite the Ukrainian efforts near Svatova, Makivka, Kreminna, and Kuzymivka. The Russian media reported the destruction of a battalion of Mobiks from Voronezh near Makivka. According to Verska, this battalion lost 529 men out of 570. So despite the relative stability of the front line, the battles have been extremely heavy. Russia has also attempted counter-offensives on this front, as they have reportedly recaptured a small amount of ground towards Novovodiana. Particularly fierce fighting also took place in the Kreminna sector, where Russia has been trying to push the Ukrainian units away from the P-66 highway.
I just need my water. One sec.
Novovodiana. Particularly fierce fighting also took place in the Kreminna sector, where Russia has been trying to push the Ukrainian units away from the P-66 highway. But as of November 15th, the situation on the North Luhansk front remained largely unchanged. The overall stalemate on the Zaporizhian front continued too. More news on the deployment of additional units, particularly after the liberation of the right bank of the Dnipro from both sides to this front, was reported. For months it has been speculated that Ukraine is preparing for another counter-offensive, this time in Zaporizhia. For now, the stalemate continues, as the biggest news from the battlefield in this period was the capture of the southern part of Pavlivka by the Russian army. The pro-Russian sources started claiming this in late October, but it appears that after an initial setback, the 72nd Mechanized Brigade managed to negate the advance of the 155th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade and other elements of the Russian Marines. This frontal assault from the road, coming from Yehorivka, which is under Ukrainian fire control, has caused very significant losses on the Russian army. These losses were acknowledged by Russian military bloggers and later by the soldiers of the 155th Brigade, who sent a public letter to the governor of Primorsky Krai on November 6th. In this letter, they accused the Russian commander of the Eastern Military District, General Rustam Muradov, and his subordinate commanding officers of sending them to take Pavlivka even though the only road leading to it is under fire control of the Ukrainian defenders in Pavlivka and Vuhledar, which has caused almost 300 men KIA, WIA and MIA, destruction of 50% of the military vehicles in 4 days. This letter is more evidence that on the Donbass front, the Russian command continues sending its units on heavily damaging frontal assaults without much to show for it. The Russian MOD refuted this claim and stated that less than 1% of the brigade was killed and less than 7% was wounded due to battles in the past 10 days. Despite heavy losses, the Russian units in this sector managed to re-enter Pavlivka on November 7th, and by November 14th, the Russian MOD officially declared the capture of this village, although the footage on hand shows that they failed to advance past the center of this small settlement. The tactical purpose of this offensive is to reach Vuhledar, as the Russians have unsuccessfully attempted to advance on it from Ikilska, but the strategic objective of this offensive is not yet clear. The fiercest battles continued to rage on the Donbass front, from Soledar in the north and Mariinka in the south.
Guys, always remember, this is huge help. It's unless you're Ukrainian, in which case, somehow if you are watching this, I hope you are doing as great as you possibly can in the situation. But for the rest of us, the mini map really, really helps.
Wagner Donbass front, from Soledar in the north and Mariinka in the south. Wagner mercenaries, DPR separatists, pro-Kadyrov Chechen battalions, and regular Russian army units continued attacking Avdiivka, Soledar, Bakhmut, Mayorsk, Vesela, Vodiana, Pervomaiska, Novomikhailivka, Mariinka, Andriivka, Klishchiivka, Zaitseva, Opitna, and Ivanhrad. Two of the latter were already claimed to be under Russian control, but battles in and around these towns raged in this period too. On November 2nd, the Russian and DPR units managed to gain a foothold in Mariinka. On November 6th, Wagner entered the southern outskirts of Ivanhrad. On November 7th, Wagner and LPR units reportedly broke through Ukrainian defenses in Bilohorivka. On November 8th, the Russian media reported about mopping up operations in Bakhmutska. According to Russian telegram channels, by November 10th, Wagner units made advances in Bilohorivka, Andrivka, and Kleshchiivka. By November 14th, the Russian army and DPR militia reportedly captured Mayorsk, while Wagner made further advances inside Opyzhna. But these territorial gains continue to deplete the Russian manpower and military equipment reserves. The current front line has been heavily fortified since the war in Donbass broke out in 2014, and it is extremely difficult to advance there. The strategic purpose of advancing on this front, while losing on the Kherson and North Luhansk fronts, is still unclear. The most plausible explanation is Putin's wish to take the whole area of Donetsk Oblast under Russian control in order to be able to proclaim some sort of victory.
Can I just say, my God, the maps on this channel are just on a lot of history channels, but just so good. I think it's easy to miss, but just the
most plausible explanation
and they keep
is
getting
Putin's
better.
wish to take the whole area of Donetsk Oblast under Russian control in order to be able to proclaim some sort of victory. But the current pace of Russian advance is inadequate compared to the extremely heavy losses they have been taking on this front. Russia continues to implement measures to restore the losses of its manpower and military equipment. Russian people are still receiving mobilization summons as of early November. Moreover, Ukrainian authorities of Melitopol and Mariupol stated that Russia has been coercing locals into Russian-organized territorial defense units. On November 4th, Putin signed a decree allowing people convicted of grave crimes to be mobilized. On November 14th, he signed a decree allowing foreigners to serve as contracted soldiers in the Russian army. Calls to extend the period of mandatory military service to 2 years, like in good old Soviet times, continued being...
I forget I was going to ask. This is why I always just need to ask it when I think of it. I'll think of it again.
...as contracted soldiers in the Russian army. Calls to extend the period of mandatory military service to 2 years, like in good old Soviet times, continued being made by Russian politicians. Mobilization remained a poorly organized, problematic, and costly endeavor for the Kremlin in this period. Several videos show discontent and anger of the mobilized and their family members for an array of issues like not being paid the promised money, not...
I remember it. Do you think, so I've seen like a video, I think it was like a YouTube short or like maybe it was a different video, but how it's like, the difference between the launch sequences of U.S. nuclear weapons versus Russian nuclear weapons. And the video said how in the United States, the president says it and they're launched. But he said in the Russian case, just because Putin orders a nuclear strike doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And I'm thinking, what? And the reason was that people below him who end up in the line of command that goes to actually pressing the button can say no. And I'm like, well, technically, so can the American people. Okay, if that's the case, if they just say no, then wouldn't Putin just have that guy killed and then replace him with a person who will say yes? So that made no sense to me. People below him he could say launch a nuke and people below him could say no. Well, yeah, but if they do say no, them and their family is going to be killed, or them going to be killed, and then he'll put in someone who will say yes. So, anyways.
Family members for an array of issues like not being paid the promised money, not receiving proper military training prior to being shipped to Ukraine, poor equipment, and appalling conditions that emerged from this period from Ulyanovsk, the Chuvashia Republic, Voronezh Oblast, and Moscow Oblast. Putin has signed a decree envisaging a one-time payment of more than $3,000 to the mobilized, which is proving difficult for the regional authorities who are supposed to pay this money. Regional authorities are trying to justify delays in payments, but it is safe to say that the majority of the mobilized and their family members are not going to care about the nuances of regional budgets and will continue demanding their due. This may cause problems for Russia, which is already suffering from sanctions in the foreseeable future. Ukrainian military intelligence claimed that Iran plans to send more than 200 Shahed-136, Mahajer-6 and Arash-2 drones to Russia. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov later stated that Russia initially purchased 300 drones from Iran and has used almost all of them. The sides now have agreed to a provision of 1,500 to 2,400 Iranian drones. Iranian surface-to-surface ballistic missiles are also on the table. Ukrainian military intelligence official Vadim Skibitsky claimed that Iran has decided to provide Fateh 110 and Zulfikar ballistic missile systems, but we have not seen them used in Ukraine yet as of November 16th. On November 4th, CNN claimed that Iran has been asking Russia for help in the purchase of nuclear materials, to which Russia has not responded yet. While Russia is becoming increasingly reliant on Iranian weapon supplies, it is tough to see Russia being happy to help Iran with the manufacturing of nuclear weapons. On November 5th, Iran finally acknowledged that it had indeed given drones to Russia, but according to the Iranian foreign minister, the drones had been supplied months before the war. On November 8th, one of the key individuals of the Putin regime, the Russian National Security Council Secretary, Nikolai Patrushev, traveled to Tehran to meet with the Iranian President Raisi and discuss additional weapon supplies to Russia. Sky News published a story claiming that Russia has paid Iran 140 million euros for drones, along with providing the theocratic regime with samples of Enlaw, Javelin and Stinger, which the Iranian weapons manufacturing industry may look to replicate. But according to United States officials, Iran has not been the only weapon supplier of Russia in this period. The US National Security Council spokesman, John Kirby, claimed on November 2nd that North Korea is supplying Russia with artillery shells. Of course, Ukraine continued receiving military aid and other types of support from the West in the first half of November. On November 4th, the US pledged 45 T-72 tanks purchased from Czechia and modernized after that. 250
I feel like this is like the ultimate leverage or ultimate advantage that Ukraine has over Russia is that Russia is going around to these different powers. I mean, if it can get Chinese weapons, I'm sure they're much more advanced than Iranian or especially North Korean. But Russia is like, hey, we just need ammunition. We need ammunition. I don't care how good or bad it is. Ammunition, we need drones. And then Ukraine is the complete other. Ukraine has just a plethora of very advanced military nations that are just like, yep, here you go. And so the production side, Ukraine just has a way bigger advantage. Of course, Ukraine can't get everything they want, like jets, for instance, but...
On November 4th, the US pledged 45 T-72 tanks purchased from Czechia and modernized after that. 250 M1117 armored personnel carriers, 1,100 Phoenix Ghost loitering munitions, 40 armored riverine boats, and other military supplies costing $400 million. On November 5th, it was reported that 17 EU member states sent 500 electric generators, which will help Ukraine withstand the Russian onslaught on its energy infrastructure. On November 7th, Defense Minister Reznikov announced that NASAM's air defense systems and Aspide missiles had already arrived in Ukraine. On November 10th, the Pentagon announced another security package worth $400 million, which included missiles for Hawk air defense systems, 4 Avenger surface-to-air systems, Stinger manpads, HIMARS munitions.
I gotta say, good for Spain. When I think of like military powers in Europe, Spain is not one of the first that comes to my mind. And they're very far away from where all the conflict is going. And yet, in a lot of these videos, I see them providing, I see their flag in the ammunition and armored vehicle statistics, just military aid. So good on Spain.
1,000 non-precision and 500 precision 155mm artillery shells, 100 HMM WVs, 400 grenade launchers, and other equipment and supplies. However, the US government continues its measured approach to weapon supply to Ukraine, as it does not want to be the party causing an escalation of the war. For instance, the Wall Street Journal reported that the United States has refused to provide Grey Eagle MQ-1C drones to Ukraine. On November 14th, Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau pledged a military aid package worth 500 million Canadian dollars to Ukraine. The European Union also continues to play its part. The EU Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, stated that it has already provided military supplies worth more than 8 billion euros to Ukraine. Also, the German Minister of Defense said that up to 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers will be trained in Germany until June 2023. We may say that things on the diplomatic front were a bit more active in this period too. On November 2nd, Russia officially agreed to rejoin the grain deal after its démarche in response to the Ukrainian attack on the Black Sea Fleet. The Kremlin also claimed that Ukraine took obligations not to use the grain corridor to attack Russian assets. Ukraine refuted this claim by stating that it did not undertake any additional commitments and has not threatened the grain corridor. Russia likely attempted to bully its counterparts into agreeing with its position, as usual, but the weakening of the Russian Black Sea Fleet is quite clear, and Turkey knows about it. On November 7th, it was revealed that Ankara refused the entrance of the Russian cruiser Vayag and the Russian destroyer Admiral Tributz into the Black Sea through Bosphorus. These vessels traveled all the way from Vladivostok only to be turned back. It looks like, at this point, Russia is not in a position to dictate its will in the Black Sea, and it has been reported that the Kremlin plans to agree to the extension of the grain deal, which is set to end on November 9th.
Wait, so does that mean that the Russian ships were allowed passage through the Suez? I'm not sure if anyone has the ability to deny them. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess Egypt, right? Or did they have to go all the way around Africa and then through Gibraltar?
19th. Another noteworthy diplomatic event was the meeting between US intelligence chief William Burns and Russia's Sergei Naryshkin on November 14th in Ankara. It is reported that the main topic of this meeting was the nuclear threats by Russia and other issues related to international security. While the potential settlement of the war in Ukraine was not discussed between the sides, one should not forget that this was the first face-to-face meeting between high-ranking officials of America and Russia since the start of the war.
I think Turkey is a super important country in this conflict. It's in the, it's in the EU. Or is it in the EU? Wait. I always get confused if a country's in NATO or in the EU. It's a country that it is affiliated a lot with Europe, right? But I think it's distance enough that it can be a mediator, I guess is the safest way for me to say that without sounding too stupid.
The fact that this meeting took place raises hopes regarding the unlikeliness of a nuclear strike by Russia. It is indicative that the Kremlin's nuclear-mongering rhetoric, which escalated following Putin's "this is not a bluff" speech, has become way less frequent. We can hear an occasional nuclear threat in talk shows on state TV channels, but threatening the whole world with a nuclear apocalypse and saying the motto, "You will die, but we will go to heaven," is not mainstream in Russia anymore. Despite small positive signals about potential peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, there is still no breakthrough. On November 9th, the Russian MFA spokesperson Maria Zakharova stated that Russia was ready to talk with Ukraine, taking into account the emerging realities. This happened on the same day as the decision to withdraw from Kherson, and was a notable change in the Russian rhetoric regarding negotiations. A day before that, Zelensky stated conditions for talks with Russia, which included reparations for damages and losses, a clause that was later supported by the UN General Assembly vote, complete restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, punishment of every war criminal, and provision of guarantees that Ukraine won't be attacked in the future. On November 11th, Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, said that Russia is open to dialogue without preconditions. But whatever...
You see, I don't blame Ukraine for wanting this, but I hate sugarcoating. I don't like if your condition for ending the war is to see Putin tried for war crimes, I hope that happens. That'd be great, but that is It's never going to happen. It's never. How do you have that happen? The only way, I feel like as time goes on, Putin, who's not a stupid individual, right? And he's paranoid, right? So he is just going to continue. Like, you don't think he's thinking in his head, hey, this isn't going as great as I thought it would, and the likelihood of someone taking me out has gone up, someone within your own country, then you are going to get super paranoid and solidify your most loyal supporters are going to be around you and down as far as you can. And so I don't see any way punishment of every war criminal. I don't know about that happening. Complete restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. So that's everything, including Crimea, obviously. Maybe that happens. I mean, that's certainly more likely than punishment of every war criminal. And guarantees that Ukraine won't be attacked in the future. That's reasonable for sure. There's a difference between, when I say reasonable, there's a difference between what I think is reasonable to want given the destruction put upon you, and reasonable to what to expect to actually happen in reality. Two different types of reasonable. All of these are reasonable in terms of a justice point of view, right? Like that would be justice served. War reparations, punishment of every war criminal, all of my territory back, don't attack me in the future. But the other, that is just not realistic in my opinion. I could be wrong, please let me know in the comments, but I think there is going to become a point where the power to stop the war, where Russia, if they want to say, all right, we'll stop here, but we keep Crimea and we keep Donetsk or Luhansk or whatever, I think at that point, then after a long period of time, people are going to be starting to look to Ukraine and be like, this can't go on forever. But I don't know. It's complicated, and I know I'm not close to an expert in this stuff. I'm still learning about it, but that's my thoughts.
Said that Russia is open to dialogue without preconditions. But whatever small hope the statements raised was crushed by the largest missile strike by Russia since the start of the war on November 15th. The Ukrainian Air Force Command stated that Russia launched 90 Kh-101 and Kh-555 cruise missiles and numerous drones against Ukrainian critical infrastructure, particularly its energy facilities. Ukraine claimed that it had struck down 73 cruise missiles and all drones. Ukraine claimed that it had struck down 73 cruise missiles and all drones. Strikes were reported in Kyiv, Zhytomyr, Rivne, Lviv, Volyn, Vinnytsia, Khmelnytsky, Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, Odessa, Kirovohrad, Cherkasy, and Kharkiv oblasts. This time, strikes also had international consequences, as Moldova reported power outages, while oil supply to Hungary, Czechia, and Slovakia stopped due to lack of power. But most importantly, the Polish border town of Zawodów was struck, which killed 2 residents. Of course, Poland is a NATO member, and immediately fears and expectations of retaliation by NATO against Russia emerged. But it seems that at this point, the West is not interested in escalation, since both the American and Polish governments stated that this incident happened due to a Ukrainian air defense missile missing its target and landing in Poland. While Western governments and NATO blamed Russia for the incident, they also officially acknowledged that it was not a deliberate attack by Russia. As of November 16th, Ukraine demanded evidence that it was indeed its errant missile and rejected any responsibility for this incident. The liberation of the right bank of the Dnipro was the most important event in November's first half. Russia keeps making minimal gains on the Donbass front, which costs them dearly in manpower and military equipment, but it mightily struggles on the Kherson and North Luhansk fronts. Very soon, the mud might turn into snow and ice, making offensive operations more achievable. Ukraine maintains momentum and will keep looking for ways to liberate more.
Does the Dnieper River in winter freeze over enough for tanks to cross?
Territory.
Or at least armored vehicles?
Ukraine maintains momentum and will keep looking for ways to liberate more territory. With the liberation of Kherson, Ukraine liberated half of the land occupied by Russia since the February invasion. North Luhansk and Zaporizhia seem like places where Ukraine may look to develop its success. That would be a deadly blow to the Russian campaign in Ukraine. Russia is trying to avoid this by sending more Mobics to Ukraine, purchasing more weapons from its allies, and maintaining control at home. The latter is becoming increasingly problematic. Billionaire sponsor of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, continues leveraging his active participation in the war in Ukraine to gain more political points at home. He has kept undermining the Russian authorities, both externally and internally. Prigozhin very proudly and openly acknowledged that Russia is meddling in the American elections, which has been rejected by Russian officials on numerous occasions before, while also requesting that the Russian Prosecutor General's office open a case against the St. Petersburg governor for refusal to provide a permit for construction of the Wagner Center in the old capital of Russia. Both sides are suffering heavy losses in the war. On November 10th, the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, stated that well over 100,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and wounded in action. The same is true for military equipment. Let's look at the figures of visually confirmed losses of military equipment provided by the Oryx blog. As of November 16th, for Russia, these are 1,491 tanks, 3,159 vehicles, 191 command posts and communication stations, 25 heavy mortars, 500 artillery pieces and vehicles, 151 multiple rocket launchers, 63 aircraft, 67 helicopters, and 149 drones. For Ukraine, these are...
Guys, so the number on the left is the total throughout the war, and the one on the right is the amount lost in the time period that this episode covered, right?
360 tanks, 1,012 vehicles, 7 command posts and communication stations, 169 artillery pieces and vehicles, 32 multiple rocket launchers, 55 aircraft, 22 helicopters, and 51 drones. Our coverage of this conflict will continue soon, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps.
And I've asked before how much of this is a failure on Russia's part, those numbers, and how much of it is contributed to the fact that an invading army is going to need much more equipment and lose much more equipment than a defending army. So I've asked that before, like, how do you kind of rationalize the numbers even more? Really great video. Thanks, Melkor, getting me back on it. I'd really like to know what you guys see as a reasonable, when I say reasonable, as in realistic, not just in a perfect world, how Russia should be punished, but what a realistic demand is. I'd really like to know what you guys think. All right. Hope you guys are all doing well. Love y'all. If you are Ukrainian and happen to be watching this, I hope you are doing as well as you possibly can be doing, given the situation, the war going on, invasion. All right. I'll see you guys next time. All right. I'll react to the next one. I won't wait as long in between episodes. All right. I'll try and catch up. See you guys. See you next time. Bye.